Hello and welcome to GameSack. I figured now would be as good a time as any to focus on 2D games on the Sega Saturn. Now the Saturn is supposed to be a 2D monster, so there should be a lot of incredible games in this episode. Now I'm not going to cover every single 2D game, and I'm going to do my best to focus on strictly 2D games, so no games with polygonalist systems. I'm, like I said, going to do my best. Anyway, let's get into the games. First up is Assault Suit Lanos 2 from Messiah. This is the Japan-only sequel to Target Earth on the Genesis, and it's in the same series as Cybernator on the Super NES. Like Target Earth, this one is tough as balls until you acclimate to it, and that can take a while. The graphics in this one look rather ugly since they're not scaled properly and they shimmer like crazy. But if you can get past that and the difficulty curve, you'll find a great game here. Up next is Astall from Sega. This is an amazing example of 2D on the Saturn. The background layers look painted and absolutely gorgeous. Nearly every level is an incredible work of art. Not only that, but it's supported by an outstanding musical score. The gameplay isn't bad, but let's face it, if the game didn't look and sound like it does, most people probably wouldn't give it a second thought. In fact, the sound effects and the voices are almost Yoshi's Island level of annoying. Still, you should check this one out just to see the kinds of games we could have gotten had developers continued down this path with such passion. Here's Batsugun, I don't know, from Toaplan and Ben Presto. This is a vertical shooter that was only released in Japan. It's a bit typical, but it's still really good. It's approaching on bullet hell status as the screen can get pretty crowded sometimes, but I've yet to see any evidence of slowdown anywhere. As you destroy enemies, you gain experience and eventually you'll level up and become more powerful. Fortunately, you don't lose that level when you die. This is definitely a fun one if you love vertical shooters. This is Battle Garega from Rising and Electronic Arts. This is another cool vertical shooter that stayed in Japan. You're supposed to play this one a certain way strategically. The better you do, the harder it gets. I've never paid attention to any of that and I just play it like a regular shooter. I mean, I seem to do okay. The thing that impresses me the most about this one is the debris that flies all over the screen as you shoot things. All of this is its very own sprite and it never slows down anywhere. That is pretty damned impressive. Here's Castlevania Symphony of the Night from Konami, also known as Akumajo Dracula X. I just wanted to mention this one really quick. This is one of the best 2D games of the 32-bit generation, and it coined the term Metroidvania. Metroidvania! Sadly, this is a very bad, rushed port that doesn't play to any of the Saturn's strengths. This one has a few trivial extras, but it's certainly no consolation. Please, just play it on the PlayStation instead, where it actually got an English release. This is Cotton 2 from Success. Here's a Japan-only horizontal shooter with a cutesy witch theme. You have different colored crystals which represent your different weapons. Each weapon also has its own unique special attack. Tons of beautiful 2D background layers, sprites, and effects in this one. You can use the extended RAM cartridge to get a couple of extra voices in the game if that's your thing. Overall, this one's pretty enjoyable. Here's Darius Gaiden from Taito and Ving, or Darius Gaiden if you must. This is a horizontal shooter, and it's far and away the very best game in the entire Darius franchise. It's even the best game in the Darius franchise. Seriously, it's not even close. This entire game can be pretty trippy. The visuals sometimes feel like the game maybe came with a little bit of LSD. Hell, even the music is trippy. This is a game that was primarily overlooked because there were no polygons in it, and man did people love their polygons at the time. Dodonpachi from Cave is a super cool vertical shooter. This Japan-only release has 2 normal shots and a bomb. The regular normal shot kind of disperses a bit so you can hit more enemies. When you use a bomb in this mode, the enemy turns into gold stars for you to collect if score is something that you care about. The other shot is more concentrated in the center and you move slower as you fire. Using your bomb here instead results in a super beam. The enemy shots are brightly colored so that you can see them, and there will often be a lot on screen at once. But if you have world-class skills like I do, you can easily dodge every bullet in the game as I'm doing here. This one has some great music too. I like this game a lot. Here's Dragon Force by Sega and Working Designs. This is an in-depth strategy game that I always forget how to play. People seem to love it though, and you do need to give it some time to finally click with you. It's never really clicked with me, but don't take my word for it, because most people who enjoy strategy games absolutely love this one. There's lots of menu stuff for you to do, and you can slowly roam around the overhead map. When you get into a battle, you can have upwards of 200 sprites on screen at once, which is only about 2/3 of what the Neo Geo can do. It's still really impressive to see though, and honestly, I doubt the Neo Geo could do this. Oh, and don't be fooled by that 3D looking ground plane. That's a 2D background layer. It's done by the Saturn's VDP2. The Super Nintendo has Mode 7 and the Saturn has the VDP2. No polygons here. Granted, all Saturn polygons are actually made out of sprites, but that's beyond the scope of this episode. It just goes to show you how powerful the sprite capabilities of the Saturn actually are. Anyway, ask your Aunt Gertrude to pick this game up for your next birthday. There were 2 Dungeons & Dragons beat-em-ups from Capcom, though they came in the same package. This one is Shadow over Mystara. These are both part of the Dungeons & Dragons collection, and this particular one requires the 4MB RAM cartridge. This one stayed in Japan because it's good. We're just not allowed to have all the cool stuff here. It's not entirely a normal beat-em-up, as you have extra abilities at the bottom of the screen to help you during the game. This one has great artwork, just like you'd expect from Capcom, but the Saturn version has awful loading times, and many of them. This next game I first played when I borrowed it from a friend back in the late 90s. He actually lives over in Pittsburgh and he had to mail the game to me here in Denver, and I was like, yeah, it's pretty good. I had no idea how much this game would go up in price over the years, but fortunately I was able to get myself a copy. This is Elevator Action Returns from Taito and Ving. This is a great port of the arcade game and a huge step up over the original elevator action. The characters are small but animated well, and you can shoot most things in any given stage and they'll react. I love the detail in this one. It's also highly sought after on the Saturn, and understandably so. Unfortunately, this one stayed in Japan. No Dexter's Lab makeover for this one. This is Earthworm Jim 2 from Playmates. This game is okay. I personally like the first one a lot more. The level design in this one is honestly kind of annoying. But the graphics are good and the music is even better. In fact, the music is the saving grace for this game. But hey, it's here on the Saturn. Here's Galactic Attack from Taito and Ving. This vertical shooter is known as Layer Section in Japan. Despite the odd name change, this is a fantastic game and one of my favorite vertical shooters on the system. You have a normal shot and a lock-on, but no bombs of any kind. There are lots of fancy scaling effects as well as raster effects. I'd say this one is just about 100% accurate to the arcade game when played in It still looks great normally, but some of the raster effects had to be reworked and it'll look a little different. Don't underestimate this one. Here's the Game Paradise, or Game Tengoku from Jalico. This is an excellent vertical shooter which stayed in Japan, as you can probably guess. This basically takes place inside of a Japanese arcade, and you'll see lots of video game and even pinball stuff. At one point, an 8-bit CPU takes over your Saturn's 32-bit CPU. The enemies become pixelated, and you even see references to lots of old 8-bit arcade games. You can even interact with the end credits just like in Super Monkey Ball. The sound can be a touch annoying sometimes, but it's never enough to make it less fun. This is Gex from Crystal Dynamics. This is a port of the original 3DO game, but this version scrolls more smoothly since the Saturn has tons better hardware than the 3DO. The main feature in this game is that Gex makes wisecracks through the entire game, the same ones again and again.
This one's for Johnny!
Each area has one or two unique ones if you're lucky. This one has never really been one of my favorites, but it has its fans. Are you one of them?
This one's for Johnny!
Here's Golden Axe: The Duel from Sega. This is a decent looking but clumsily playing one-on-one fighter. The controls are set up just like Street Fighter 2. Sega didn't make many 2D fighting games, and their inexperience at them shows with this title. It isn't awful and you can get some enjoyment out of it, but it's not the Golden Axe arcade game I would have preferred they bring to the Saturn. Up next is Guardian Heroes from Treasure. This one's a beat 'em up, but since it's from Treasure, it has its own quirks which make it unique. You can't walk all over like in normal beat 'em ups. Instead, you switch between planes of depth, similar to how Fatal Fury works. 2 can play at the same time, but 6 players can compete in the versus mode. It takes a short amount of time to become accustomed to how the game works, but soon you'll find it fits like a glove and you'll be having a hell of a good time. Herc's Adventures is a cool one from LucasArts. This is an overhead action game with a cartoony look and some good humor just like you'd expect from LucasArts. I just wish one of the playable characters was George Lucas. I mean, come on, he should be playable in every LucasArts game. You have a melee attack as well as long-range attacks that you can use. You can jump and even run. Like the smash hit game Poltergeist, if you die, you're sent to the underworld and you need to work your way out. This is a fun touch. This game comes highly recommended on any platform you can get it on. Here's Hyper Duel from Technosoft. This is a horizontal shooter from the makers of the Thunder Force games. While this entry is nowhere near as good as those, it's still entertaining. If you press the A button, you fire as a normal spaceship. If you press the B button, you transform and fire as a robot. Bad things tend to happen when I play as the robot, so I just try to play as the ship. If you hold both fire buttons together, you get a crazy ricocheting shot, but it only lasts as long as the little meter in the bottom corner of the screen has stuff in it. This stayed in Japan, and I considered importing it back in the day, but I didn't. I should have, because it's crazy expensive now. Overall, this is a good game with some nice music. Next is KO Flying Squadron 2. This wasn't released in North America, but it was released pretty much everywhere else. The first game was a horizontal shooter, but this one is a platformer. You do have some shooting stages though, and the music is lifted from the first game. The graphics are fantastic. Sadly, the controls aren't responsive enough and it can be frustrating in spots. Still, I love the artwork and the color in this one. Some of the English voices are a bit annoying, so you might want to go with the Japanese version like I did.
Fire! 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 Got it! I got a hit! 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 Fire! 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 Fire!
There are a few King of Fighters games on the system, all of which stayed in Japan, but I kicked the King of Fighters 97 for today's episode. These all play by choosing 3 characters, and you need to defeat the 3 opponents in each stage to move on to the next. These games all require an expansion cartridge. They're all as close to the Neo Geo originals as they could be at the time, aside from the loading times. These games are excellent. Legend of Oasis from Ancient is the follow-up, or prequel rather, to Beyond Oasis, which was on the Genesis. This is called Story of Thor 2 outside of North America. This is a highly overlooked game that very few people played, mainly because not many people had a Saturn, and most of the people who had one passed this one up. And I'm here to tell you that you shouldn't. It's an excellent game, and it has great visuals, fun puzzles, and thematic music. Be absolutely sure that you check this one out. Hey, it's me, Joe. I'm back to remind you what I look like. Yeah, I know, it's kind of a cruel thing to do. Anyway, let's continue. Magic Knight Rayearth from Working Designs is an excellent action RPG. You control 3 high school girls and can switch between them on the fly. They each have their own life meter. This one's incredibly entertaining, and it hooked me the entire way through. The visuals are very colorful, and the music isn't half bad. Although this was an early release for the Saturn in Japan, it was the final release on the console in North America. Go figure. Here's Mega Man X4 from Capcom. There are a couple Mega Man games on the Saturn, but this is the one I have. What can I say? It's Mega Man. Well, Mega Man X. The real Mega Man doesn't need an X after his name. Anyway, it looks good, and as always, I'm fairly indifferent to the series except when it comes to the music. And the stuff here isn't bad. Metal Slug from SNK is a port of their Neo Geo game to the Saturn. This Japan-only release for the console requires an extended RAM cartridge and is almost a perfect conversion in every way. There's a little bit more slowdown than the Neo Geo original, but I'm gonna blame the programming because there's no way the Saturn couldn't handle this natively. It's okay though, as it's plenty good enough and not worth complaining about. This game blows me away almost as much these days as it did when I first imported it back in the late 90s. It was the only way I could afford to play it back then.
Shotgun. Thank you.
There's a pretty good version of NBA Jam Tournament Edition from Midway and Acclaim. You've got lots of voices, player scaling, CD music, and all that stuff. You also have loading times between each quarter. The music gets kind of old after about 45 seconds or so. I've always kind of sucked at this game, but even still, it's always fun playing for a couple of quarters. This one's called Neketsu Oyako, and it's from Technosoft. As you've no doubt surmised by the name alone, this is a Japan-only release. This is a beat-em-up that's pretty silly, and it makes me sad that we never saw Streets of Rage 4 on the Saturn. The PlayStation version of this game is more optimized, but this one is still excellent. I mean, hell, I'd rather pick up a random Sega Saturn that's on the back of an ocean-bound whale than a PlayStation that's on the back of a whale. I'm pretty sure that whales prefer Sega. This game isn't perfect, but it still has lots to offer, and you might not think to play it otherwise. Give it a go. Here's Police Knots from Konami. This is a spiritual follow-up to Snatcher, and it was only released in Japan, but it's been translated by fans. This is a point-and-click adventure that's a fantastic one from the mind of Hideo Kojima. Like Snatcher, there are even action segments where you can use a light gun, but you can always use a regular controller instead. It's not overly long, which is a good thing because it keeps your interest and it knows not to drag on. Definitely make an effort to play this one if you can.
やめろ、ジョナサン。正体を表したか、ジョナサン・イングラム。お前は4時間前ここで北条と言い争った。前妻であるロレインへの嫉妬心からその銃で北条を射殺した。今のようにそうやってな。
This is Princess Crown from Atlas. This was made by the team that would eventually become Vanillaware. It's a gorgeous-looking game that plays somewhat like Odin Sphere on the PlayStation 2. It's not a straight-up action game. You get into seemingly random battles and you have loot to collect after you win. Assuming you win. This one's Japan only, but a translation has been in the works for over 10 years. I'm not sure exactly what's going on with that, but I hope that soon everyone will be able to play this in English. Come on, guys. This is Purikura Daisakusen from Atlas. Yep, another Japan-only title. There's a lot of that on the Saturn because it was way more popular over there. This is an isometric action game, almost a run and gun, but not quite. You control your choice of character as you destroy enemies with shots or melee attacks which are stronger. Each character also has a screen bomb type of move that can really help. Often the downed enemies turn into treasures or even animals for you to collect. The visuals aren't bad, and the music is catchy. This game gets pretty tough really fast, so be careful. This is Rayman from Ubisoft. Nah, I'm not gonna say it. Nope, not gonna do it. Okay, fine. Ubisoft, Ibisoft, we all be soft for Ubisoft. Okay, let's move on. This is a fairly good upgrade over the original Jaguar version that improves on the already incredible graphics. This is one of the few games to almost give Install a run for its money in the visuals department. The colors and details are just outstanding. The gameplay here is also adequate and the music is nice. Unfortunately, this version pans a lot of its sound effects which should be centered, and the music seems to be presented in mono. Real Bout Fatal Fury Special is another Japan-only Neo Geo port from SNK. You guessed it, this needs a RAM cartridge. This is basically Fatal Fury all grown up. The fighting system feels like it's matured into something special, and the game is a lot more fun as a result. I feel that the graphics have been improved over the earlier games in every regard as well. But most of all, this one's a lot more fun than the original Fake Bout Fatal Fury games, at least I think so. You gotta keep it real. No, that's dumb. Here's Sakura Wars from Sega, also known as Sakura Taisen. This was an extremely popular game in Japan that never came to the West, but it's been translated by fans so now you can fully enjoy it. This one is a combination of many different genres like text adventure where you make certain choices, point and click where you point and click, dating simulator where you hope to make the girls like you, and even a strategy game. This game does it all. Well, except for the things that it doesn't do. This certainly isn't for everyone, but it can be fun. Seriously though, you can't talk about 2D games on the Saturn and not mention this juggernaut. Here's Saturn Bomberman from Hudson Soft. This is one of the best, if not the best, Bomberman games that exists. There's lots to do in single player mode and the stages always change visually so it doesn't become boring. You always want to keep going. There's even a master mode with its own stages and you only have one life. And then there's the battle mode where you can have up to 10 players simultaneously all on the same screen, though you might need to squint to see it. This is a fantastic game. Here's Scud, the disposable assassin from Cyrox. This one's a run and gun that's dark and grimy, but still looks good. It can also be played with a light gun, and it's different that way. However, I like the run and gun mode here much better. The game feels more difficult than it actually is, as sometimes enemies shoot you from off the screen. The bosses can spam you, and often you can't even tell what's going on. I always get bored at level 2 because it never seems to end, so I end it myself by turning the game off. Alright, we're partway through the letter S now, but I just wanted to pop on screen real quick to let you know that this is the last time I'm going to be popping on screen until I do it again. So let's finish this up. This is Sengoku Blade, or Sengoku Ace Episode 2 from Saikyo and Atlas. This is a horizontal shooter that stayed in Japan where you control a flying person. It takes place in ancient Japan and it has all of the associated imagery, which looks fantastic. It also has tons of excellent parallax scrolling. You have a regular shot, which can get more powerful, as well as a bomb blast, but each character only has the one type of regular shot. I always pick the big boob girl because, well, I like looking at her. This is a good shooter that people rarely mention. This is Sexy Parodius from Konami. This Japan-only horizontal shooter is basically a parody of Konami games, if you will. There are a few Parodius games on the Saturn, however, this one has a Castlevania stage which is really cool. If you like Gradius, then you'll appreciate the gameplay of this one, though it adds the bell system which can add points or limited effects. For example, you can grow big and invincible for a short time. The game sometimes tells you what the bells do so you don't have to memorize the colors. Great visuals and a perfectly fitting soundtrack make this and all of the Parodius games on the system a winner. This is Shinobi Legions from Sega. While this certainly doesn't live up to the Shinobi games that were on the Genesis, this is still a fairly solid action platformer. Your katana is now your main attack, but you still have your double jump and your shurikens. The characters and enemies are all digitized like Mortal Kombat, and it gives it that mid-90s look for sure. It even comes with a low-budget Japanese ninja movie between the stages. It even has a dinosaur, and who doesn't love dinosaurs? The European version has its own exclusive soundtrack from Richard Jacques. Here's Silhouette Mirage from Treasure. This version stayed in Japan. I always kind of dread firing this one up because it takes a while to get the hang of it. But by the time I'm done playing the game, I love it. It's just that getting acquainted to it is kind of tough. Face left and you're one color, face right and you're another, and you've got to determine which of your colors damages the enemy, which have their own colors, and it's just all very bizarre. It's weird because it's from Treasure, as they kept trying to either invent new formulas or redesign established ones. But at least they were still making 2D games. This is also on the PlayStation, and that version came to the US thanks to working designs. The Saturn version's better though, with more parallax and animation, but it is missing an extra boss fight. This is Sonic 3D Blast from Traveler's Tales and Sega. Despite the 3D in the game's title, this one is strictly 2D, though the isometric perspective can give the illusion of some fake 3D, I guess. Wasn't fooling me. This is what Saturn owners got instead of a real mainline Sonic game on the console. Your goal is to kill enemies, which then turn into flickies. Touch them and the flickies will follow you, and you take them to a special ring so that they can escape. It's actually just like the game called, well, Flicky. The colors and the detail are great, a big jump up from the Genesis version. The music by Richard Jacques is excellent and definitely the game's standout feature. Sadly, the gameplay is mid at best, and even I would rather play a real Sonic game. Steam Gear Mash from Tamsoft is kind of interesting. This is basically an isometric run and gun that was left in Japan. You can toggle between different styles of locking your weapon and even find new styles. You also find new sub-weapons which will help you progress further into the stages. And naturally, there are boss fights to contend with. This game moves fast, and sometimes that can work against you. It's not bad, but it's definitely a bit odd. Here's Street Fighter Alpha from Capcom. This is what they gave us instead of Street Fighter 3 at the time, and I don't think anyone was complaining. The Alpha sub-series just kept getting better and better, and because of that, this first one just doesn't get as much love. I guess the Saturn version's Super Shadows aren't the correct shade of blue compared to the arcade, which makes the entire game worthless. However, if you set the music to original, they are the correct shade.
KO, you win.
This is Super Tempo from Red and Sega. This is a follow-up to the 32X and Game Gear games, and naturally, this one was restricted to Japan. It's actually pretty fun, though this time it doesn't take place inside a TV show. Bubbles are your main weapon here. You know, because you're a bug and bugs love bubbles, I guess. You can also transform into Super Tempo, which is a giant beefcake human bug thing. The game does get a bit cryptic sometimes, but never does it become boring. There are lots of crisp and colorful graphics here. This is Three Dirty Dwarves from Appaloosa. This is a beat 'em up, but it certainly isn't typical. You control 3 characters that you can switch to at any time. If you take a hit, that dwarf dies for a short time. He'll come back, eventually. If all 3 dwarves take a hit before another comes back, it's game over. It can be very difficult. The graphics certainly aren't bad, but we've seen better from the console. I do really like the trolley stage though, as usually I'm not a huge fan of these types of levels. This is Tri-Rush Deppy from Nihon Create. This one stayed in Japan and I think I'm okay with that. You play as a taxicab who needs to make it to the finish. Your life bar is your fuel gauge and it's constantly draining and you need to collect fuel. The graphics are fantastic, but the control is pretty stiff. It can be tough to land on the enemies to kill them. This one had a lot of potential, but instead it's kind of forgettable. Looks great though. Vampire Savior is a 4-meg RAM cart game from Capcom. This was only released in Japan on the console, but elsewhere it's known as Darkstalkers 3. This is another outstanding one-on-one fighting game and the follow-up to Night Warriors, which itself was an incredible game. Do you want what's basically a Halloween-themed fighting game? Look no further. X-Men vs. Street Fighter from Capcom was the first game to use the 4 meg expansion cartridge. Once again, this was a Japan-only release on the platform. For all intents and purposes, this one is identical to the arcade, even when it comes to the loading time between rounds and matches. Big fighters, great animation and visuals, perfect Q-Sound audio, and tons of fun to be had here. This really showed off the 2D power of the console. Not only that, but it's incredibly enjoyable, just like most of Capcom's other fighting games on the system, of which there were many.
Hadouken! Shoryuken! Hadouken! Shoryuken! Cajun strike! Shoryuken!
And there you go, a bunch of 2D games for the Sega Saturn. Left out a bunch of fighting games, a bunch of shooters, some mahjong games, and probably others. So, what do you think of the 2D powers of the Sega Saturn? Is it amazingly awesome, or is it overrated, or is it just, whatever? And what 2D games that I didn't include in this episode should people check out? Let me know. In the meantime, thank you for watching GameSack.
Do you want to play Contra 3, The Alien Wars? Well, you're a horrible person. You need to play 36 Grey Hole starring Fred Couples instead. Fred Couples has put his name on the best video game ever made. 36 Great Holes is presented by Golf Magazine. Golf Magazine doesn't present Contra 3. It says right here that you can choose men or women players. They're not kidding, you totally can. Holy crap, it's Fred Couples himself!
Hello.
Do you and a few of your friends want to play GoldenEye? Well, you can all go burn in hell forever! GoldenEye can only be played by 4 players! 36 Great Holes starring Fred Couples can be played by 8 players! That's like twice as many! 36 Great Holes starring Fred Couples!